This is the 1970s, so we are stripping away the caricature of the disco ball to reveal a decade of radical, messy, and profound transformation.
It's about time we did. I
Yeah.
mean, when most people think of the 70s, their mind immediately goes to, a very specific, almost parody-like image.
Right, the polyester suits, the beegies.
Exactly. The Bee Gees falsetto, John Travolta pointing at the ceiling. It's um it's just so easy to dismiss the entire decade as a sort of stylistic mistake.
A joke about bad fashion.
A joke about bad fashion, bad hair. But if you actually dig into the sociology, the fashion archives, the political landscape, you find something completely different. You find a society that is, well, it's going through a really painful but necessary molting process.
That's the perfect way to put it. And that's exactly the vibe I want to get into today. We're on a mission here to explore the 1970s not as a punchline about bad interior design.
Though we will get to the wood paneling, I promise.
Oh, we're definitely getting to the wood paneling later. But we want to look at it as a pivotal era of, quote, individuality. It was a time when social scripts were literally being rewritten in real time.
Hmm.
Authority was being challenged on every single level, and maybe most importantly for us today, privacy was still a very tangible physical concept.
Yeah, that's a huge point. It feels like maybe the last moment in history where you could genuinely get lost, for better and sometimes for worse.
Getting lost is a perfect frame for this, and we have a massive stack of materials to get through. We're looking at what? Fashion archives detailing the shift from the structured girdle.
To the braless look and then the confusingly voluminous big look. We also have some really deep sociological essays on the sexual revolution that go way beyond the cliches of free love.
And we're going to transport you to the massive, chaotic Isle of Wight festival in 1970, which honestly makes Woodstock look like a quiet little tea party.
It really does.
And then, because we have to keep it grounded, we are going to finish up in a dark, shag-carpeted basement bar drinking some objectively terrible cocktails.
Yeah, we're dissecting the rise of that basement bar and the very questionable quality of 1970s mixology. Plus, we've got some really poignant personal reflections on the quietness and deep connections of the pre-digital era.
So settle in. I am ready to unpack the nostalgia and the why, and I know you are ready to analyze the sociological underpinnings of why we all decided to wear jersey wraps and drink sugary booze.
I certainly am. Let's start with maybe the most visible layer of the decade, the politics of fabric.
It's interesting you call it politics. We often just talk about fashion as, well, clothes, aesthetic choices.
Sure.
But in the 70s, what you put on your body was arguably the loudest political statement you could make. And I think the biggest statement started with what you weren't wearing. We need to talk about the death of structure.
This is a massive, massive shift. And to really understand how radical it was,
Yeah.
you have to look at the baseline of the 1950s and, the early 60s. The mid-century female silhouette was entirely manufactured. It was architectural.
Architectural is the perfect word.
You had the girdle, the panty girdle, the bullet bra. The body was something to be contained, molded, and, well, restricted into a very specific geometric shape.
Yeah.
It wasn't natural.
I was reading through the vintage dancer notes we have, and the way they describe the decline of the girdle is fascinating. It wasn't just a slow fade out because of new technology or something.
No, not at all.
It was a rejection. By the time we hit the 70s, women were physically refusing to be encased in all that rubber and elastic.
Precisely. It was the natural look taking over. But just think about the psychological implication of that word, natural. For decades, natural was considered unkempt. Or indecent even.
Unladylike.
Totally unladylike. And then suddenly you have this huge surge where women chose to go completely braless, or if they did wear a bra, it was these minimal, non-accentuating ones.
And it wasn't just about comfort, was it? Though I'm sure that was a huge part of it.
Of course, comfort was part of it. But it was more. It was a physical rejection of the patriarchy.
It's a literal loosening of the binds. It's like saying, I am no longer going to reshape my body to fit your aesthetic standard.
Exactly. If my body jiggles, it jiggles. If it has a shape you personally don't like, that's your problem, not mine.
But here's where the industry data gets really paradoxical, and this surprised me. You would assume, logically, that if everyone is burning their bras and ditching their girdles, the lingerie industry would completely crash.
You would think so. It's the logical conclusion.
Yeah.
But the market data actually shows the opposite. The luxury lingerie market was booming in the 70s.
How does that even work?
The design philosophy underwent a complete metamorphosis. That's
Yeah.
how. Instead of heavy, rubberized shaping garments, the structural engineering of underwear,
Right.
you started seeing these light, airy designs Camisoles, teddies, step-ins.
And the fabric shifted too. It wasn't heavy elastic power mesh anymore.
No, it went to silk, and silk like nylon.
So it's softer.
Softer, yes. And here's the key difference, and this is the crucial sociological shift. It's about who the garment was for. A girdle is for the observer. It creates a silhouette for someone else to look at.
Right. It's for the male gaze, essentially.
100%. But a silk teddy, that's tactile. That feels good against your skin. These items were meant to be pretty for the wearer. They weren't architectural tools to build a body for a man's approval. They were sensory experiences for the woman wearing them.
Wow, that is such a nuanced take on liberation. It's not just about, nudity or taking it all off. It's about reclaiming the sensory experience of your own body. So you go braless in public as a kind of protest, but you buy silk for yourself in private because you deserve to feel good.
It marks the transition of women from being sort of objects to be viewed to subjects who experience.
Yeah.
And that newfound agency carried over directly into the workplace. We absolutely have to talk about the uniform of the new working woman.
The wrap dress. Diane von Furstenberg. It's so iconic now, but looking at it with modern eyes, it just looks like a nice, simple dress. Why was this such a bombshell in 1974?
To understand the impact, you have to look at the demographic shift that was happening. The feminist fashion essays we've got point out that for the first time, you had a professional woman demographic that was distinct, powerful, and growing really rapidly.
They were entering offices that had been male-dominated for, centuries?
Exactly. And they needed clothes that worked in a boardroom but didn't feel like a costume.
Right, because before that, your choices were what? Dress like a secretary, or try to copy the men with these boxy, unflattering suits.
Or wear the stiff, structured suits of the 50s. The wrap dress changed the game because of the fabric. Jersey.
Doesn't wrinkle.
Doesn't wrinkle. Travels well. You can stuff it in a suitcase, fly to a meeting, pull it out, and it looks perfect. But there's a detail about the design that I absolutely love, and von Furstenberg herself was very open about this.
Is this the zipper comment? I love this.
It is. She famously pointed out that the dress has no zippers and no snaps. She said, and this is a great quote, "If you're trying to slip out without waking a sleeping man, zips are a nightmare."
That is incredible. I mean, just try to imagine a fashion designer in the 1950s saying that out loud.
It would have been career suicide. It would have been scandalous.
Absolutely.
But in 1974, it was a selling point. Think about how much agency that implies.
Yeah.
It implies sexual autonomy.
It suggests that the woman wearing this dress is professional enough to run a corporation during the day, but sexually active enough to have a sleeping man to sneak away from in the morning. It symbolizes a dual life that women were finally allowed to claim publicly.
It's the ultimate day-to-night transition, but with a very specific, empowered narrative attached to it. It's not day-to-night so you can go home and cook dinner for your husband.
Right.
It's day-to-night so you can live your own life on your own terms. It validated the complex life of the modern woman.
But of course, fashion is never a straight line. While the wrap dress was streamlining the silhouette, another trend was doing the absolute opposite.
Yes. We have to discuss the big look.
This one always confuses me. It's around 1973, 1974, high fashion just.
Yeah.
It just inflated. We're talking voluminous clothing.
Yeah.
Layering, drawstrings, capes, shawls.
There's a phrase in one of our sources that I love. One size is too big is the right size.
Yes, that's it. It's so counterintuitive.
It was a fascinating pivot. You had designers like Kenzo Takada and Karl Lagerfeld really pushing this unconstructed look. No linings, no padding, just yards and yards of fabric swathing the body.
But why? I mean, we just spent the 60s fighting for the miniskirt and the right to show skin. We just talked about the wrap dress celebrating the female form. So why suddenly drown everyone in what is basically a tent?
Well, there are two main ways to interpret this.
Yeah.
And I think they represent the friction of the decade perfectly.
Yeah.
On one hand, it connects to the peasant aesthetic, a return to nature, comfort, natural fibers like cotton and wool. It's a rejection of the synthetic, plastic, space-age look of the 60s mod scene. It's sort of the visual equivalent of eating granola.
So it's about comfort and rejecting that kind of plastic future. I get that.
That's part of it. But sociologically, it was highly controversial. Some feminists really criticized
But
it.
why? What was the argument?
They argued that after fighting for the right to own their sexuality, this fashion trend was all about hiding the body again. It felt regressive to them.
I can see that. It's almost like the message was, oh, you're in the workforce now. Better cover up so you don't distract the men.
That was one argument, for sure. But others saw it as the ultimate form of freedom, freedom from objectification.
How so?
Well, if you're wearing a billowing smock dress or a giant poncho, You aren't being assessed on your waist-to-hip ratio. You're not being judged on whether you fit the conventional beauty standard. You're just existing. It takes the male gaze out of the equation entirely because the gaze has nothing to latch onto.
That's a powerful idea. It's almost like saying, my body is my business, and you don't even get to see the outline of it. Deal with my mind instead.
Precisely. It's a form of armor. And speaking of armor, we see a very similar statement in the adoption of menswear by women. The pantsuit.
The pantsuit is such a staple now, it's really hard to imagine it being controversial. But in the 70s, walking into an office in pants was a battle cry.
Was a demand for equal seriousness. If you're entering a male-dominated workspace and you want to be treated as a peer, you adopt the uniform of power, but you subvert it.
Right, like the Yves Saint Laurent Le Smoking tuxedo.
Exactly. You show that you can wear the pants, both literally and figuratively. It's a visual language of equality. I can do this job, and I am going to dress like I belong here.
It's aggressive, but in the best possible way.
And that visual aggression, that complete rewriting of the visual code, it brings us to the broader rewriting of social rules. Because if fashion was rewriting the script on how we looked, the sexual revolution was rewriting the script on how we acted.
And I want to be clear here, because when we say sexual revolution, we need to move past the Austin Powers swinging montage.
Yes.
Right. We tend to think of it as just people having more sex, which, sure, that was happening. But the sources we're looking at describe a fundamental collapse of infrastructure. It wasn't just free love, it was the demolition of the old rules without a blueprint for the new ones.
That is the absolute key. Let's look at the drivers first. You have the decline of the double standard, that age-old idea that men can have sex but women can't. That was crumbling.
And then the technology, the pill.
The pill is huge. It completely decoupled sex from procreation for the first time in human history. And then you have the hard statistics. By the 1960s and 70s, divorce rates were climbing toward 50%.
That number always staggers me, 50%. Half of all marriages ending? That must have felt like the sky was falling for the generation that grew up in the 50s.
To them, it felt like the end of civilization. It meant that suddenly the happily ever after narrative wasn't guaranteed anymore. People were entering and exiting relationships much more fluidly.
The essay on the sexual revolution also mentions the intellectual roots here, like Wilhelm Reich.
Right. Wilhelm Reich arguing that sexual repression is the root of neurosis. And you also had Alfred Kinsey's data, which showed that Americans were already breaking all the rules in secret anyway.
So the revolution wasn't necessarily that people's behavior changed overnight. It was that we stopped pretending. We took the private behavior and made it public.
In part, yes. But there's a concept from sociologists Gagnon and Simon that's in our source material that I think explains the 70s better than anything else. They talk about social scripts.
This is a term I want to dig into. What exactly is a social script in this context?
Well, think of it like a play or a movie. The idea is that sex and relationships aren't just biological urges. They're performances based on a script that society gives you. For centuries, that script was incredibly rigid and simple. You meet someone, you court, you marry, you procreate. That was the only valid script. If you went off script, you were an outcast.
And in the 70s, the actors on stage just threw away the pages.
They burned the pages.
Oh.
And the 70s were this chaotic period of improvisation. People were frantically trying to write new scripts in real time. Because if the goal isn't just marriage and kids, then what is it? Is it pleasure? Is it self-actualization? Is it community? No one knew.
That has to explain the rise of all these new institutions the sources mentioned.
Yeah.
Open marriages, mate swapping, singles bars.
Yes.
It feels like people were just running beta tests on new ways to live.
Beta testing is the perfect analogy. I mean, take the singles bar. That didn't really exist as a concept before. It was a new institution designed specifically to facilitate these new unwritten scripts.
A laboratory for dating.
It was. It was a place where you went specifically to negotiate temporary connection. It was awkward, it was messy, it was often terrible, but it was an attempt to build a new structure for this new freedom.
And this improvisation wasn't just for heterosexual couples. The gay liberation movement was absolutely central to this rewriting of scripts. In fact, you could argue they were better at it because they had to be.
Absolutely. Because same-sex relationships were forced to exist outside the traditional marriage and procreation script, gay men and lesbians had to invent their own ways of relating. They couldn't rely on the old roadmap.
Our source details the creation of spaces like bathhouses and sex clubs.
Right. And while those might sound scandalous or purely hedonistic to some people today, the source argues they were actually spaces of profound autonomy.
They were sanctuaries.
They were. They allowed for sexual autonomy and community building away from a very hostile world. And importantly, they influenced the broader culture's view on separating sex from procreation. You didn't have to be gay to look at that and realize, wait a minute, sex can just be for connection or pleasure. It doesn't have to be for making a family. That realization started to filter out into the suburbs.
But we have to be realistic here. We can't paint this as some kind of utopia of freedom. The sources also point out there was a massive counter-revolution happening at the same time.
Oh no, it wasn't all just happy experimentation. There was significant organized pushback.
The silent majority.
Exactly. Many women, and certainly the religious right, viewed these trends as the absolute destruction of the family unit. They saw the rising divorce rates and the open sexuality not as freedom, but as societal collapse. They felt the ground shaking under their feet and they were terrified.
And then there's the public health aspect. The party had a cost, a real biological cost.
Which is the tragic bookend to this entire era. The emergence of STDs like herpes and gonorrhea became a huge public issue in the 70s, and then, ominously, you have the beginning of the AIDS crisis in the early 80s.
That really forced a transition, didn't it, from that free love dynamic to safer sex. It just put a hard stop on that feeling of limitless possibility.
It reintroduced consequence to the equation in a really brutal way.
Right.
But for that brief window in the 70s, the scripts were wide open. It was a time of immense vulnerability and immense possibility.
Speaking of wide open, chaotic spaces,
Mhm.
we need to leave the bedroom and go to a field, a very large field on the Isle of Wight in 1970.
This is one of my favorite topics in our stack because it perfectly encapsulates the friction we keep talking about.
Yeah.
Everyone talks about Woodstock. Woodstock is the golden child of the era, the myth of peace and love.
Right.
But the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970, that is the dark horse. That's the reality check.
It's darker, it is so much bigger, and it is infinitely more chaotic. The source says this was the peak of the festival era, but it was also the moment it kind of broke under its own weight.
Just look at the scale. Woodstock had, what, maybe 400,000 people? The estimates for the Isle of Wight in 1970 run between 600,000 and 700,000 people.
That's mind-boggling. That is a major city appearing overnight on an island with a population of under 100,000. The logistics?
The logistics alone are a nightmare. They didn't have the sanitation, the food, or the security for that many people. But the vibe was different, too. Woodstock has this mythology of cooperation. Isle of Wight had tension. It was cold. It was windy. It was on edge.
Let's talk about the lineup, though, because despite all that chaos, the music was absolutely historic.
Oh, it's just the heavy hitters. You had Jimi Hendrix in one of his last shows ever, The Who at the absolute peak of their powers, Miles Davis bringing jazz fusion to a rock crowd, which was unheard of, The Doors.
And the anecdote about the Doors is wild. Jim Morrison refused to have spotlights on the band.
He played in the dark,
Yeah.
a single red spotlight on him, and that was it. The source mentions the wind, bad weather, and the cold. Just imagine that atmosphere.
Yeah.
You're in a crowd of 500,000 people, you're shivering, resources are running low.
Yeah.
And on stage, there is this brooding, dark performance lit by a single, ominous red light. It wasn't a sunny sing-along, it was moody, it was intense, it felt almost apocalyptic.
There's this one specific moment with Joni Mitchell that I think perfectly captures the friction of the entire decade. This story gives me goosebumps every time I read about it.
The Yogi Joe incident.
Yes. So you have to set the scene. Joni Mitchell is on stage. She is the symbol of 60s folk idealism. She's playing Woodstock, a song about stardust and golden souls. And then this hippie named Yogi Joe interrupts her set.
He literally climbs on stage. He grabs the microphone from her, and he starts ranting about Desolation Row, which was this encampment outside the fences where people who couldn't afford tickets were protesting the ticket price.
It's the class war spilling right onto the stage, and the crowd is getting restless. They're booing. It's a powder keg about to go off. And Joni Mitchell, who is usually seen as this ethereal, gentle figure, she snaps.
She doesn't retreat. She leans in the mic.
It was such a raw moment. She stops her set, and she makes this emotional plea. She says, "Give us some respect." She fights back against the chaos. It just symbolizes the conflict at the very heart of the festival.
And that's it. You had the promoters, the Folk Brothers, who were trying to run a business, and you had this massive audience, including a lot of anarchists, who believed the music should be free.
The free festival debacle. It was the clash between the capitalist music industry and the anti-materialist counterculture, just played out in real time in a muddy field.
And eventually, the fences were compromised. They were torn down. The promoters had to just give up and declare it a free festival because they physically couldn't keep people out. It was a complete commercial disaster.
The source says it killed the event for 32 years. It didn't come back until 2002. But there's a reflection here that this friction, this is the 70s in a nutshell. It wasn't just peace and love, it was a struggle. It was a fight over who owns the culture.
And the counterculture won the battle in Isle of Wight. They got in for free, but you could say they lost the war. The infrastructure just couldn't hold. You can't sustain a city of 700,000 people on good vibes alone.
But let's pivot for a second from the chaos of the crowd to the experience of the music itself. Because underneath all the politics, there was a really different way of consuming art back then. We've got this YouTube transcript source that talks about the analog connection.
This is such a beautiful point. In the 70s, music wasn't just background noise. It wasn't a playlist you shuffled while you're doing the dishes. It was a destination.
The newsstand. The source talks about the bottom shelf allure of music magazines. I love that image.
Music magazines were the internet of the day. If you wanted to know what was happening, you didn't scroll, you walked to the store. You bought Rolling Stone or Cream or Melody Maker, you read every single line. You scrutinized the photos, the barrier to entry, walking to the store, spending the money. It made the information feel more valuable.
And the quietness. The source mentions sitting with a vinyl record. You take it out of the sleeve, you put the needle down, there's that crackle. You hold the album cover, which is this big piece of art, 12 inches by 12 inches. You read the liner notes. You aren't multitasking. You're just listening.
That deep listening is a form of connection that I think we've largely lost. It required patience. It required money to buy the record. It required time. And because of that investment, the connection you had to the art was profound.
Yeah.
You lived inside that album for 45 minutes uninterrupted.
It's that idea of finding peace of mind in the 70s quietness. It wasn't an absence of noise, it was the presence of space. Space to let the art actually hit you.
Space to think. Space to connect. And sometimes when the world got too loud, when the inflation was too high, and the festivals were too chaotic, you needed a physical space to retreat to.
Speaking of space, sometimes you just need a place to hide. You need a basement.
The domestic retreat.
We have a Reddit thread here that is just pure gold. It explores the phenomenon of the basement bar. If you're under 30, you might only know this from movies, but if you were around then, you know this room.
Oh, it is iconic. Describe the visuals for us because they are so specific.
Wood paneling. Always wood paneling. Brown on beige, shag carpet that felt like walking on a giant sheepdog. Usually a distinct lack of windows. And the centerpiece, the bar, often padded with faux leather, maybe with some brass tacks.
Don't forget the whiskey barrel furniture. That was a staple. But sociologically, why did this happen? Why did millions of middle-class families suddenly decide they needed a pub in their basement?
The source suggests it was a reaction to suburban boredom or just a place to hide from the kids.
There was also a huge status symbol for the middle class. Having a finished basement with a bar meant you had made it. You had leisure time. You had space for entertaining. Even if, as a lot of the Reddit users noted, the bar was rarely actually used.
It was performative leisure.
That's a great way to put it. It was the architecture of escapism. You go down the stairs, and you're in a different world. A darker, browner, shaggier world where the problems of the office couldn't find you.
And in that world, you need a drink.
Oh boy, the cocktail culture. Or, as our VinePair source puts it, the lack thereof.
This is one of the funniest parts of our research. The verdict from the experts is pretty much unanimous. Were any good cocktails created in the 70s? The answer is a big, emphatic no.
Not a single one.
We're talking about the Alabama Slammer, the Tequila Sunrise, the Harvey Wallbanger. These are just neon-colored sugar bombs.
These are not subtle drinks. The source describes the Alabama Slammer as tasting like a drunk My Little Pony stuffed with marzipan.
That is the best, most visceral description I have ever heard. But why? Why were the drinks so bad? We had good cocktails in the 20s. We had martinis in the 50s. What happened?
One word: industrialization. The VinePair source explains that high-quality spirits were being replaced by cheap, industrial-grade alcohol. The industry knew that bars were using well spirits to save money.
So the booze just tasted terrible. It was harsh.
It tasted like gasoline. So how do you fix that? You can't drink it neat. You can't make a classic cocktail with it.
Sugar. You just bury it.
Heaps of sugar. Cream, fruit juices, Galliano. You mask the taste completely. The goal wasn't to appreciate the nuance of the whiskey. The goal was to get a buzz without gagging on cheap liquor.
Hence the pina colada. Hence the neon orange tequila sunrise with the grenadines sinking to the bottom like some kind of sad lava lamp.
But there's a deeper layer here, too. It's not just about bad ingredients. It goes back to the mood of the decade.
Connect this to the bigger picture for us. Why did we want these neon orange drinks?
Because the 70s were tough. You
Yeah.
had record inflation, stagflation. You had political disillusionment with Watergate, Nixon resigning, a total loss of trust in institutions. You had the post-Vietnam trauma. It was a national malaise, as Carter called it.
Reality was gritty. Just think of the movies of the era: Taxi Driver, Serpico, The French Connection. They were all gray and dirty and cynical.
Exactly. So people didn't want a serious, bitter drink. They wanted a drink that looked like a vacation. They wanted tequila sunrise because it looked like a beautiful sunset in a glass. They wanted a pina colada because it tasted like an island they couldn't afford to visit.
So the sugary neon-colored drink was a coping mechanism. It was a little hit of dopamine in a brown wood-paneled room.
Exactly. It wasn't about the craft. It was about the feeling. It was visual escapism. It was saying, the world outside is falling apart, but down here in my basement, I have a drink that tastes like pineapple and looks like a cartoon.
Man, that is bleak, but also weirdly charming. It humanizes the bad taste. It wasn't just that they didn't know better, it's that they needed something sweet.
That's the 70s, finding sweetness in the middle of the malaise.
So what does this all mean? We have gone from the political statement of a silk teddy to the chaos of Isle of Wight, all the way down to a shag-carpeted basement. We've covered a lot of ground.
If we synthesize this whole deep dive, I think the core insight is that the 70s was a decade of friction.
Friction is the perfect word. It wasn't smooth, nothing was easy.
It was the messy middle ground. You had the idealism of the 60s crashing head-on into the consumerism that would define the 80s. It was a transition period, the training wheels were off, and nobody knew how to ride the bike yet.
It was a time of finding yourself without an internet map. You couldn't Google how to have an open marriage or how to dress for a festival. You just had to go do it and see what happened.
And that led to terrible mistakes, like bad drinks and chaotic festivals. But it also led to profound freedoms, the rewriting of sexual scripts, the feminist revolution in fashion. These things happened because people were willing to live in the friction, in the uncertainty.
It was a decade where people had to figure it out for themselves.
Yeah.
And that figuring it out required connection. It required showing up. It required listening to the whole album because you literally couldn't skip the track.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought. We look back at the 70s and we see it as backward. No smartphones, no internet, bad fabrics, we pity them. But I want you to consider that concept of quietness we discussed.
The idea that maybe the disconnection fostered a different kind of humanity?
Exactly. Was the malaise of the 70s actually more authentic than the curated lives we live today? When you wrote a letter in 1975, you really wrote it. You sat down, you thought about the words. When you talked to a neighbor, you really talked, because you weren't looking at a screen over their shoulder.
We've traded the messy authentic for the polished digital. We have better cocktails now, and we have better fabrics, but do we have better conversations?
I wonder if we've lost something vital in that trade. We've lost the basement, we've lost the quiet, we've lost the boredom.
That is something to chew on. The value of being bored in a wood-paneled room.
Indeed. Boredom is where the creativity comes from, after all.
So if you want to feel just a fraction of that 70s authenticity, here's your challenge for the week. Put your phone in a drawer for an hour tonight. Just 1 hour. Put on a full album vinyl if you have it, but streaming is fine as long as you don't skip. And just listen. Don't post about it. Just experience it.
And if you're feeling really brave, mix yourself a tequila sunrise.
But maybe use the good tequila this time. We don't need to recreate everything from the 70s.
Please, use the good tequila. Your head will thank you tomorrow.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you in the next decade.